Welcome everybody to our CSU Well-being cooking demo. Today we're talking about honey and we've got some special guests with us, and I'll let Miss Valerie, our registered dietitian, introduce her. Take it away, Miss Valerie.
Hey, good morning everyone, and welcome to another CSU Well-being Wednesday. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank Lakeisha for handling all of the background technology and marketing that goes around with this. Lashika spends a lot of time doing this, so I appreciate that. And also thank you to Columbus State University for sponsoring this. It's a real pleasure to be here with everyone today. And I think we're also part of your Creativity and Innovation Forum. So I hope that goes well for you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation as well. We are really delighted to be with you today and have Jennifer Candler with us. She is going to talk about honey and honeybees and the journey a honeybee takes, what's involved in their work day. They're quite busy as well, just like us, if you will. So Jennifer and I have known each other for actually a really long time. She's my younger sister. So I'm delighted that she's able to join us today and talk about her apiaries, and I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer and let her get started.
Great, thank you, Valerie, and thank you all for being here today. I'm looking forward to telling you a little bit more about honey and honeybees. My husband Rick and I started an apiary back in 2011 with 2 hives. We now have as many as 10 or 11 in 1 year, but we started because we were curious about honey and honeybees and apiculture. And like many of you, we grew up with a jar of honey on the breakfast table, ready to be spread on warm biscuits or hot cornbread or something. So that's not something that we never outgrew. And as our children got older, we decided, well, let's just get some honeybees and see what all this is about. So let's dive in. We live on a farm. It's a family farm. There are 4 generations of family members living there today. And we have, in addition to that, we have a lot of native habitats and natural species, and it's perfect for honeybees. And we produce wild flora honey, and all of our honey is foraged right there on the farm. So you'll see a lot of pictures. I've taken all the pictures that you'll see, and they're from our farm and of our honeybees. So where do honeybees come from? In the continental United States, there were 4,000 species of native bees. The honeybee, Apis mellifera, is not one of them. It hails from Europe. The genus Apis means bee, and mellifera means honey carrier. At one time, it was thought that bees carried honey back to the hive, but we now know that they take nectar back to the hive and convert it to honey. Sorry about that. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So a hive consists of 1 queen, only one, thousands of worker bees, all female, generally between 40 and 60,000 in a strong hive, and 1 male drone. The queen will only leave the hive once, and that's to go on a mating run. She'll mate with 12 to 15 male drones, each of whom will die after mating, and then she'll return to the hive with enough sperm to last her lifetime. She'll lay up to 1 million eggs in her lifetime, generally 1,000 or more, up to 2,500 eggs per day. She's very, very active layer. So you see this picture here. Can you pick out the queen? She has an elongated body, very short wings. And the reason for that is because she's the only female with sexual organs, and she needs room to store all that sperm that she'll use for laying eggs over her lifetime. So here's the queen. You can see her. She's very easy to spot. And then these are the 2 male drones, much bigger heads, bigger bodies. And then the rest of these bees are all female worker bees. And in the background is brood. That's bee larva that has already been capped but has not yet hatched. Honeybees live in what's called a Langstroth hive, and Lorraine Lorenzo Langstroth came up with this hive in 1852, and it's what most modern beekeepers use. It's what makes it so useful for beekeepers is that you can take out parts without tearing the hive apart and remove frames and rearrange hives in the frame and still keep everything intact. So what you see here is a stand. We typically use cinder blocks for our, can be solid wood or screened. We generally use screened bottom boards. It's just a metal mesh, and it allows debris to fall through, and it allows ventilation. And then you have these boxes stacked vertically called supers. The deep one is usually on the bottom. It's called deep because it's the tallest and the biggest. And then there are honey supers on top. And those are generally where the honey is made. Some beekeepers use queen excluders. We don't use those. But if you have a queen excluder, then the gap is too large for, or excuse me, too small for the queen to pass through, but small enough for the worker bees to pass through. So it keeps her down on the bottom where she lays eggs, and the honey frames stay clear of brood, and only honey and pollen are collected up there. And then at the top you have an inner cover and an outer cover. So the outer cover is like the roof, and it has deep sides, deep overhanging sides that protect the hive from rain. The inner cover is really only there because bees will glue all the parts together in a hive unless you put that cover there. They will glue the top frames to the hive. So let me explain that a little better. Bees produce what's called propolis. It is like caulking. It's made from saliva and beeswax and tree resin. And they will glue, they'll just seal all the cracks in the hive, just as you would like around a window or a door frame in your own home. They do the same thing. And it keeps out moisture, it keeps out drafts, it keeps the hive tight, and it keeps out insects. So they'll seal everything. What Langstreth figured out was that if that gap is right around 1/4 inch, it's too big for the bees to fill with propolis, but it's not quite large enough for them to fill with wax. So the gaps between these frames here are that magic number, all around 1/4 inch. And so the bees will just only produce wax on the frames. They won't fill in the gaps between with wax, and they won't fill them in with propolis. On this honey frame here, you can see a little bit of propolis. I thought I had some more pictures of propolis, but it's very brittle in the winter when it's cold, and it's much like melted chewing gum you would step on hot pavement in the summer. It's just very sticky stuff. And so they'll put it between these frames. They'll put it all around the edge of this top inner cover. And you've probably seen a hive tool. It looks like a paint scraper. And that's what beekeepers use to pry this lid off and to pry these frames apart, because they've all been sealed with propolis, and they stick together. And you could break it one day, go back in the hive, and it will be sealed again the next day. The life cycle of a female honeybee. The queen, as I said, lays up to 1,000 or more eggs a day, a good active queen. She deposits an egg in the cell. It'll stay in the cell for up to 6 days. And then the worker bees will cap that cell with wax. And it's kind of a wax, it's mixed with other things, but it's basically like a wax cap. So they will seal that. And then after 21 days, a female worker will hatch. Male drones take 24 days to hatch, and queens, if they do produce a new queen, she only takes 16 days to hatch. So in this picture here, you can see, probably can't see eggs because they're very small, but you can see here some uncapped larvae, these white, small little worm-looking things. Those have not been capped. These have been capped. And so after 21 days, these will all hatch into female worker bees. A bee will generally live about 4 to 6 weeks in the summer. They have a very short lifespan. It's because they work constantly all day long. They will leave the hive, female worker bee will leave the hive, visit 50 to 60 flowers before she comes back. They fly constantly during the day. They don't sleep. They only just rest at night. And so they work themselves very, very hard. So in the summer, they'll only live 20 to 40 days. in the winter, once the hive shuts down and they're no longer foraging and the queen is no longer producing brood, they'll live much longer and carry over to the spring when they start getting active again. So the seasons in the apiary, let me refer to my notes here so I don't leave out anything. Generally, the hive becomes active when the red maples bloom. If you live in Georgia, we live in the Piedmont of Georgia in Sharpsburg, and that's in zone 8. So generally that's around January when we start getting warm days and the red maples start blooming. And that is the first tree to produce nectar in our area. So that kind of signals the start of the bee coming back, the hive coming back to life, and the queen to start producing eggs. There are very few days of foraging in the winter. We might get a few days of 50 or 60 degree weather. It's time for the bees to go out. They can go out and poop. They don't do that in the hive. So they are anxious to get out of the hive and clean out the hive and just do some general housekeeping chores that they aren't able to do in the winter when it's too cold for them to fly. They can't fly when the temperature is below about 50 degrees, and they're really focused on keeping the queen warm. She has to stay a constant temperature of 93 degrees Fahrenheit year round. So in the winter, they're clustered around that female queen to keep her warm, and that's their job. So once we get a few days of warm weather generally in January, sometimes February, there'll be a few more days. That's when they start becoming active again. That's also a crucial time for a beekeeper because generally by then, the bees have used up their honey stores and they're very likely to starve. So there's not much blooming, so there's not much nectar to collect. The queen has started producing eggs, so they have bees to feed, but there's really not much to eat. So many beekeepers will put feeders either down here on this bottom board, or they'll take the cover off and put in a feeder, maybe an extra box that's empty with some honey or simple sugar syrup in the hive for them to eat until they can produce enough nectar on their own to sustain themselves. Spring is a very busy time for beekeepers because it's a time when honeybees swarm. And swarming is a natural way for bees to reproduce themselves and to recolonize. And it's the way they divide themselves. So here you see what's called a queen cell. It's a much longer cell. It hangs vertically in the hive, and female bees will make that if they suspect that they are going to swarm. And the reason they swarm is that they just get too crowded. There are too many bees in the hive. As beekeepers, we'll try to mitigate that some by adding more boxes and what's called checkerboarding. We'll rearrange the frame so that we have a frame of honey, a blank frame, a frame of pollen, and so on, so that the bees have more room to spread out and they don't feel like they're so crowded. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but the presence of queen cells means they're preparing to swarm. Another way a beekeeper will prevent losses from swarming is to, let me get back to that slide, is to take those queen cells out and put them in another box with some brood and some pollen and nectar, and just divide the hives intentionally before the bees have a chance to do it on their own. So there's a saying among beekeepers: a swarm in May is worth a load of hay, a swarm in June is worth a silver spoon, but a swarm in July is not worth a fly. And what that means is if you get a swarm in May, then you have a good chance of building up that hive's population and honey stores for it to be well worth you collecting that swarm, and it will produce honey in the same season. A swarm in June, the queen doesn't really have enough time to lay enough workers, and the main nectar flow, at least here in Georgia, is over by the end of May. We just don't have that much blooming after that. Most of the trees have bloomed and the shrubs, and those are the main sources of nectar for most honeybees. So there's not much for them to collect in the way of nectar after May and June. So that's what that little saying is about. Summer is very hot. This is a picture of one of our hives just a few weeks ago. It's, as I said, they keep the hive 93 degrees in summer and year round. And as you can imagine, on a 95-degree day, that's very easy to do. And it gets very hot in the hive without the only ventilation they have is right down here. And then there's a little gap in the inner cover right up here. But other than that, and the screened bottom board. But other than that, there's not much airflow in a hive. So the bees will fan the queen to keep her cool. But other than that, they will generally hang out on the outside of the box, and it's called bearding. It's perfectly normal behavior. And it's just a way to cool off. It's like you and me sitting on our front porch in the afternoon on a late summer day. It's just a way to cool off, and it's normal, but it's called bearding. Honey extraction. This takes place we usually rob our hives in June or July. And so I'll run this little video so you can see how a frame extractor works. We have a 6-frame extractor. It's a stainless steel drum. We can put 6 frames in it, and it's a we can plug it in so it spins automatically. It spins and it uses centrifugal forces to extract the honey. First, we'll cut the comb and cut all the caps off the comb, either with a hot knife or with a plastic roller that's covered with spikes, and to break the comb. And this is what the extractor looks like. We'll see if with my weak connection here, this will go. If not, I won't waste your time with that. Try it again. So it spins much faster than that, but that was enough for you to get an idea of how it works. This is what the frame looks like when it comes out of the hive.
Jennifer.
Here is honey coming out the bottom. Hey. So were you able to see that video?
A little bit of it.
Okay, well, I won't try and get the second one going. We use a screen filter for our honey. It's a mesh screen. It's 400 microns thick. It's not big enough. The holes are small enough that they allow, or big enough rather, that they allow pollen to pass through, but they catch all the bits of wax and bee parts and maybe bits of wood that may have come off the frame in the process. So when you hear that honey has been filtered, this is not what it's talking about. Filtered honey actually removes the pollen and a lot of other things. And commercial beekeepers will use commercial filters to get the honey clear so that when it sits on the shelf, it looks perfectly clear and not cloudy for consumers to buy. And the other reason they do that is that honey that has been filtered commercially will not crystallize. So when you go to buy honey on a shelf in a grocery store, you don't want to see it cloudy or crystallize. And so commercial honey beekeepers will generally filter their honey at a much smaller micron than what we use here to keep out more of the debris. There are 3 terms that you may have heard when referring to honey, and those are raw, unfiltered, and pure. Raw means the honey has not been heated at all. It's just extracted from the comb and put in a jar. Filtered, if you see the term unfiltered, that means the beekeepers only use one of these mesh screens like I use. It's not filtered to get out the pollen or any other very small particles. And then pure means nothing has been added to it, no corn syrup or other fillers. So you generally, if you're buying honey from your local beekeeper, you're not going to it's going to be pure, raw, and unfiltered. It's going to be very good honey. Fall is the time when we start looking in the hives and reducing the sizes of the hive because the queen stops producing, and so they don't need as much space. So we'll generally take off a few of the supers. We check to see if there's any disease. We look for any signs of mites, and generally we won't look in the hives because it's just too cold to open up the boxes, and the bees need to stay warm. And if you open the hive on a day that's cool and windy, they will get chilled very quickly, and it's very hard for them to bring the temperature back up on a cold day. So generally, once fall arrives, we just stay out of the hives and don't check them again until late winter. So what is nectar? Nectar is 80% water and 20% sugar. It comes from many different flowers. As I mentioned earlier, trees and shrubs are the biggest sources of nectars for almost all honeybees because they're the most prolific and have the most flowers. So bees will go to a lot of other flowers and wildflowers and crops and things, but generally trees and for natural plants, it's going to be trees and shrubs. The bees will generally source one plant at a time. So if, let's say, your holly bush is blooming, they will go and visit that holly bush to connect nectar until they've used it all up. Then they'll go to another source. And that's the reason beekeepers can get monofloral honeys, because they can take their hives to a place where a plant or a tree is blooming, and they set their hives out there, and they can be pretty sure that what's coming back into the hive is from that single source. And that's why they can label it as, say, Tupelo honey or gallberry or orange blossom or some of the other sourwood honeys. There are a lot of them out there. So what are the properties of honey? Honey is unique in that it has protein in it. Most sugars, natural sugars, don't. So it's combined of sugar, amino acids, minerals, antioxidants, all these things. But what's really unique about honey is that it's hygroscopic, it's antibacterial, it's antiseptic, and it's antifungal. So it could really be used as a wound treatment in a pinch. If you burn yourself in the kitchen, if you are out camping or something and you don't have an antibiotic, honey is a good substitute because it naturally has hydrogen peroxide in it. And there aren't too many other sugars that can make that claim. So it has a lot of benefits besides just the carbohydrates. Honey has 1% of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, and that 1% is huge as far as the health benefits go for honey. So you can see here a list of the vitamins and minerals and antioxidants that are in honey, and Valerie will probably talk more about that, but it is truly different from other sugars. On the pH scale, honey is right around 3.9, somewhere between like tomato and vinegar. It is slightly acidic, which if you're cooking, you need to take that into account. And that low acidity and low pH are what help preserve it. Honey is about 17% water. So that's the reason that things will not grow in it. It contains natural yeasts, but they won't grow unless there's more moisture in the air. And as I mentioned, honey is hygroscopic, which means it attracts moisture. It attracts water. So it will attract, if you leave your honey jar open, it will attract water. That water will get in the honey, and those wild yeasts will start fermenting, and your honey could go bad. But as long as you don't add water to your honey and you keep it sealed, it will never go bad, just because that water content and that pH are so low. So here's some honey compared to other sweeteners. It's a little bit sweeter than table sugar, and which is the kind of what everything else is compared to, sucrose. So here you see it as a 1, and right here 1. And then honey is a little bit sweeter. Agave is sweeter. Stevia is hundreds times sweeter. And then down on the bottom end, we have corn syrup and maple sugar and some other sugars. So it is slightly sweeter, which means you can use less of it when you're cooking, because the perceived sweetness is just a little bit more than you would get with normal table sugar. Honeybees need a balanced diet, just like you and I do. And they get that from the pollen and the nectar that they, in the plants that they source. So pollen is a source of protein for honeybees, and that's what they feed to the larvae. Carbohydrates come from the nectar, and that comes from all the different sources of flowers. Each flower is going to have a little slightly different protein and a slightly different set of carbohydrates and vitamins. So when bees are able to source many different plants they're getting a balanced diet, which means they're going to have a strong immune system. We've never, in 10 years of beekeeping, had any problems with our bees. We've never once treated our bees with any chemicals, either natural or synthetic, and we've never had mites. It's very unusual. But I attribute that to the varied sources we have on our farm of so many native plant species that they're able to source for their forage for nectar and pollen. And I think they're just very healthy bees for that reason. Commercial beekeepers have more problems, especially those commercial beekeepers that are sending their hives out to pollinate crops, because they're only getting a single source of food. And just like if you and I ate almonds for 3 months, we might not be very healthy, even though almonds of themselves are pretty good for you. So the problems that honeybees have in general with colony collapse disorder and some other problems generally come on the commercial side of things, where bees are not getting this balanced diet, and they're being transported. They're being exposed to chemicals, pesticides, and they have the stress of being transported. So most local hobbyist beekeepers like us are not seeing as many of these problems, especially if you live out where we are, where there's just a wide variety of plants and not much pesticide exposure. Insects are responsible for pollinating so much of what is out there. Honeybees pollinate about 1/3 of all crops, and that's very important. The other 66% is pollinated, either wind pollinated, like corn and grass crop and other grasses. But a good bit of it is pollinated by self-pollinated or pollinated by other pollinators. And as I mentioned, there are over 4,000 species of native bees, and many of those are pollinators. There are also other types of insects, butterflies, hummingbirds, bats, that are pollinators as well. So these are some things that I just gathered last fall on my farm. And you can see different kinds of acorns, persimmons, crab apples. I think these are dogwood berries, muscadines, and beauty berries. These are just some of the things, if you were to take a walk in the woods in the fall, that you would see. These have all been pollinated by insects, and they're very important to animals because, as you know, the animals are part of the food chain. So we have our insects, which are part of the food chain for many birds and frogs and dragonflies eat insects. And then the insects are, those small little animals are eaten by bigger birds and rodents and things. So it just moves up the food chain until you get to the large mammals like deer and humans. And this is a lot of their food source, and it wouldn't be possible without pollinators, including honeybees. So that is, back here. That is our apiary. I may have skipped that a little earlier, but that is our apiary. I took that earlier this spring. We don't have as many hives right now. I've moved some to the Georgia coast, which is where I am right now. And so we have honeybees in 2 places, and we currently have 7 right now at Sharpsburg, which is where that picture was taken. So I know I covered a lot of ground here, and you probably have a lot of questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of them if you have some questions. So fire away.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think she's going to stop sharing her screen right now. And while Ms. Valerie gets ready to do some of these recipes, so we can put some of these honey recipes to action. But we have our quiz questions again. So I hope y'all were paying attention. Ms. Jennifer did give us a lot of information, but if you know the answer to any of these quiz questions, you can throw them in the chat. But before we do that, we do have a question in the chat. Are honeybees making a comeback? I've heard they have been dying off.
I think they are. I think the colony losses last winter were, I don't know the exact numbers, but the percentage of honeybee losses was lower last year. You know, I still don't know. Bees naturally will just, I mean, there's just, people don't know that much about honeybees and why we have colony collapse disorder. It's a very strange thing to diagnose. And so wouldn't say they're making a comeback, because their numbers are very strong, and the honeybee is not going away. There are many hobbyist beekeepers. You hear a lot about colony collapse disorder, but really the honeybee colonies are very strong in the United States. They're not going away. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. So yeah, it's getting better though, as we understand more about how honeybees behave in the winter.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, Miss Valerie, what we cooking today in the kitchen?
Okay, wow. So if you thought your day was busy, think about that bee. This makes me feel a whole lot better about my day and put it into perspective. So we're going to take the information that Jennifer's just presented to us and meld that right into some recipes that use honey. So we've got a couple of recipes we actually have 3 recipes to put together today. And the first one is going to be incorporating a summer vegetable, cucumbers, which is great right now, perfect time to be eating those. And we're going to put a honey-based dressing on top of that. So we're going to get started with that recipe first. This is a great time to make summer recipes right now, filled with all these vegetables that we have to offer that have been pollinated by all of those bees that Jennifer just spoke about. So we're simply going to take about 3 cucumbers and slice those directly into the bowl. That's all I've done here. And then we're going to make a honey dressing. It's really simple, and it only has a couple of ingredients in it. And it really brings out the flavor of the cucumber, because we're going to be putting honey with an acid, which is a great combination. And we're going to be using a white wine vinegar. So let me pull this back so you can see it here. Just a second there. Okay, so I know that the recipes were, I think Lashika has already published those. So if you want to just follow along with me, and if you have any questions while I'm preparing the recipe, please feel free to ask. So again, we just got sliced cucumbers here. And in this bowl, we're going to add the honey, of course. Really simple dressing here to make. I'm going to add a little bit of water. I think it's 1/4 of a cup or maybe 1/2 cup in the recipe. Some of that, pretty simple ingredients. And then I'm going to add, this is white wine vinegar, which is a very interesting combination here. You get the contrast of acid from this white wine vinegar along with the sweetness of the honey, and it's a beautiful combination together. So we're just going to add that directly into the mixture here. And you might ask, what is white wine vinegar, and how could I possibly use this again? So white wine vinegar is actually a blend of white wines that's oxidized and fermented and made into this acid. So this white wine vinegar is actually an acid. And you can use a combination, or they use a combination of wines white wines to make this, called wine stock. So you can use it in other things, like other dressings if you want to make it. You can also pickle vegetables with it. It's a great way to add that sort of tangy twist to vegetables. All right, we're just going to whisk this together. This doesn't have any oil in it either, which is interesting. So it's quite light and refreshing, which makes it such a nice dressing. Just gonna give that a good whirl. All right. And then I'm just simply gonna pour it over the cucumbers, sliced cucumbers. I'm going to add just a little bit of salt to it. Not too much, that's your preference. And a little bit of pepper. You could also add your own type of spices if you want to, like if you had an Italian blend spice, you could put that in here and give it just a little bit different flavor. And I'm going to use some fresh dill. Put that right on top. And then just give it a mix. The directions say to let this sit in the refrigerator, maybe 30 or 40 minutes, and that gives time for these flavors to meld together and for the cucumber to pick up the flavors of the acid and the honey dressing. This is a pretty versatile dish because you could actually add whatever vegetables you wanted to it. So if you wanted to add grated carrots to this, you could do that. You could add a bean, like a white bean would also be very good. If you wanted to add a protein source, like a cooked strips of chicken, you know, you could do that. So you can dress it up a lot of different ways. So this is actually just be considered the base. It's perfectly fine to eat it like this. You don't have to wait if you don't want to, but the longer it sits in the refrigerator, you will get a little bit more melding of these flavors. Now, so I want to show you something else to do with this. So you can eat it just like this. However, we could also, grab my jar. Oh, I forgot to add an ingredient. I forgot to add the onions. Let's get that in there too. All right, now that's complete. So another way to do this, I was trying to think, you know, if you wanted to take this on the go, what could you actually do with this? So what I would suggest that you do if you want to take this with you is that you just spoon this into a jar and put these ingredients in first. We're going to layer a few ingredients in here, but keep these on the bottom. Put a little of the vinegar mixture on the bottom here. So you have, essentially you're going to have a dressing. And then to that, I'm just going to add some fresh baby spinach and put it right on the top. And then on top of that, this is your choice. So I've got feta cheese here, which is great with the honey and the white wine vinegar, the acid. I'm just going to pop a few pieces on top there. And then a few cherry tomatoes. And then pop the cap on that, and you've got your own little lunch to go. And again, you can change the variety of this however you want, but that's just an option for you to be able to use to take a cucumber salad and also make it in a salad to go with a different type of feel. Right before you're ready to have it for lunch, just turn it upside down and give it a shake. Maybe a little shake that way. And then that allows the dressing to mix with the ingredients. So you've got a convenient way to take a lunch with you. I wanted to show you something else to do with this dressing as well, because the versatility of the white wine vinegar and the honey goes a long ways, and you can actually change the flavor profile of this. So I'm going to set this back here. We'll come back to this in a few minutes. So while you bought the white wine vinegar, you think, well, what else am I going to do with this? You know, I just don't want to buy it for one recipe. But you can also make a vinaigrette out of this. So this is simply a little bit of olive oil, and this will change the dressing totally. I'm going to add, this is about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I'm going to add about a tablespoonful of the white wine vinegar. And to that, you could do it like this and just add salt and pepper. Okay, so that would be a very light vinaigrette. But if you actually want another spin on it, a very simple ingredient to add to this is just a little bit of Dijon mustard, or yellow mustard, or your own favorite kind of mustard that you have. We're just simply going to whisk that around. That smells really great. So that gives you a whole different flavor profile. You could use it with other vegetables. You could use it as a salad dressing for what we've just prepared. That just gives you some versatility with using white wine vinegar when you're making these summer dressings. It's really a nice way to have a light, refreshing salad with a crisp dressing on it, just to bring out all the flavors of all the vegetables. Any questions on that recipe? If not, I'm going to transition to our second one.
Okay, while Miss Valerie is transitioning, we do have some quiz questions. If you joined us last month, we have started doing little gift baskets for those winners. So I'm going to ask you a question and then you can put it down in the chat. And if you get all of the questions right today, you'll be the owner of a new basket that is put together by Miss Valerie. So the question today is, what else could you use white wine vinegar for? What else could you use white wine vinegar for? And then from Miss Jennifer's presentation, is a worker bee a male or a female? Is a worker bee a male or a female? And what is the pH of honey? What is the pH of honey? So go ahead and put those answers down in there for me. And I believe Miss Valerie is almost ready to go.
Just I have one more set of ingredients to get, and I'll be ready.
All right. We were able to answer one of them. We've got two people chiming in. Female, that is correct.
Yay!
For the worker bee, it is a female. Trish says salad dressing we can do for the white wine vinegar.
Perfect.
All right, good. We've got some answers coming in. Thank y'all. pH, there we go, 3.9. No Googling all of this stuff too. This is supposed to be just from your memory. All right, take it away, Miss Valerie.
Okay, thanks a lot, and congratulations to those who answered the quiz questions. Thank you for participating. That's always a lot of fun. I look forward to sending out those swag bags to you. Okay, our second recipe here, we're going to hop over to a breakfast recipe, and we're going to be putting together a French toast upside down Granny Smith apple casserole. Okay, this is can serve a lot of people. This is a pretty big dish, so be prepared for this. If you've got a crowd coming over, they're going to love this for breakfast. It's a great combination of apples and cinnamon, which make a perfect breakfast food that just seems to go together at breakfast time. And we're also going to be using a whole grain French toast, so we're getting a lot of fiber in that. If you've, maybe some of you have cooked ahead of time. If you haven't, what I've done for this recipe so far is that I've just sauteed these apples with the brown sugar and the honey and the spices. Hold on just a second here. I need to dismiss something off my screen. There we go. Sorry about that. So that's what I've done ahead of time, and I've just layered these apples in a baking pan that I've already sprayed some baking spray on it just to line it and to keep it so it's easy to get out. This is a recipe that you would, it really needs to be made beforehand so it can sit in the refrigerator overnight with the light custard that we're going to pour over this. But the origins of this, you may know already, for French toast go back to the Roman Empire. So it's quite likely that Julius Caesar was eating this dish as well. So French toast traditionally is made with bread and then an egg wash or an light egg custard, some call it. So you would mix milk, vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and eggs together and make a wash. You dip both sides of the bread in that, and then you fry it. So we're not quite sure how this came to the United States, but there is some indication that it was brought over by the early settlers. And people have made different spins on this dish around the country. So if you are in the United States and you're eating French toast, it's likely that you're being served with maple syrup or confectioner's sugar sprinkled on top of it, and maybe some berries, raspberries or blackberries, something like that on top of it. But if you're in England, this dish is actually called eggy bread, or sometimes called gypsy bread, because you can use leftover bread. It doesn't have to be the freshest bread, and this is a way to save the bread without throwing it away and to use it in another form. So they often serve this with ketchup instead of it being a sweet dish for us, it's usually a savory dish for them. Now, if you're in France, French toast is actually considered a dessert. It's not usually eaten for breakfast. And they call this pomme perdue, which is as close as I can get to the French designation for that word, and which means actually lost bread. So again, it's their interpretation of, let's not throw this bread away, let's use it in another way. So it's the same thing. They would put it in an egg wash and then fry it. If you're in New Zealand, this dish, this French toast would probably be topped with bacon, maple syrup, so it becomes a very hearty breakfast meal. So that's just some historical reference on French toast and how we are actually going to use this same type. We're just incorporating it into a casserole. Okay, so here's what I've done so far. I've started to layer the bread on top, and this is just sliced French bread. That's all this is. And I'm going to continue to put French bread on the top just like this, and I'm going to press it down a bit. Okay, and then I sliced the slices in half, and I'm going to simply layer those around the side, just so it gives this dish a framework. And around the country, people use different types of bread in this. It doesn't have to be French bread. If you were in the Southwest, you know, you might be using sourdough bread. If you were having this dish up north, you might see challah bread left over from a Sabbath dinner being used as a way to not waste product, but to use it. Okay, so that's all that we have, right? So I've got what you can see the layers of the apples on the bottom, and I kept the peel on so it keeps it real firm and lots of nutrition in there with the fiber. And really all I've done is I've made that light custard. This is eggs. I happen to use almond milk in this. You can use whatever kind of milk you want to, plant-based or meat or dairy-based. It doesn't make a difference. And eggs. And there's cinnamon in here, and I believe there's some more honey in here. You could add your own. You could add ginger to it. You could add nutmeg to it. That's up to you for the flavor profile. It would be great. So I'm simply going to take this mixture and then just pour it right over the eggs. The bread. Just like that. Okay. So from this point, what you do is you just cover it and pop it in the refrigerator. And I would say for at least 4 hours, and overnight would be best. Okay, before you're ready to bake this, pull it out of the refrigerator and let it rest for about 30 minutes so the temperature comes down so it doesn't take so long to cook in the oven. It's about 350. It takes about 40 minutes to cook. And what I did was actually, I actually broiled this a bit when it came out. So I turned the broiler on, and just for the last few minutes, I let this get a little bit of a crust on the bottom, okay? And then when you're finished, bring it out, and then you're gonna let it rest for just a little while so it gels up. You'll see the custard become very firm in here. And then we're gonna turn it upside down so you see the beautiful apples part. And I've got the finished product back here that I'll show you. Okay, so this is what it looks like. You can see the layers of apples in here and a little bit of custard in there. It's a really pretty dish, and it's a great way to use apples, a great way to use leftover bread, and most of the things that you have at your house, milk and eggs and cinnamon and sugars and things like that. So it's really great. I heat this up in the microwave when I'm using it. Just pop it in for just a few seconds just because I like it warm. You could also drizzle warm honey over it as well, which is actually it's a delicious way to have this as well. So that's the upside down breakfast casserole dish. All right, we're gonna go on to the next one.
All right, awesome. While Miss Valerie is prepping for our next recipe, we've got a couple more quiz questions. So if you were listening a little earlier, she mentioned this. Where can the earliest version of French toast be traced back to? The earliest version of French toast be traced back to? Go ahead and throw those answers in the chat. And then we have one more last question from Jennifer, and that was, what sugars are in nectar? What sugars are in nectar? So those are our quiz questions for right now. And we'll let people give them a couple more seconds. And we'll see what we got down here. We've got some people chiming in France, England, Roman times. All right. Our answer is Roman Empire. Roman Empire. I see a couple right responses, so we'll make sure that we get those individuals to Miss Valerie. All right, and it looks like she's ready to go.
Okay, this is a lot of fun here, and I'm going to have Jennifer chime in with me because this is really her. It was when I was speaking with her about this program and what she does with her honeys, other than putting it on biscuits and cornbread, which is absolutely delicious. She talked about infusing honeys and how easy honey is to take up flavors and flavor profiles. So I'm going to show you what I've done here, and then I want Jennifer to chime in as well and tell us what how she infuses her honeys. So all you need to do this, to infuse a honey, is you need a jar with a tight fitting lid. Like Jennifer said, you want it to keep water and moisture out of this. So you have to make sure that you've got a tight fitting lid for this to be able to infuse this correctly. You want your herbs or spices that you're going to use to be dry. So again, we don't want to use fresh herbs or fresh spices in here because they're going to have water content and moisture in them, and they may contaminate the honey. So everything that you need to use should be dried, thoroughly dried. So what I've selected, what I started these about 7 days ago, I guess, was I picked out cinnamon, whole cloves, star anise, which is an excellent sort of licorice flavor to it. It's so fragrant. And then I put some dried chili peppers. Okay, really simple. So that's what I've done. In this particular one, I have the star anise. And when you put this in the jar, you're going to see that they're going to float to the top like they will. So turn the jar over every now and then and flip it so that the star anise comes back into the emulsion in here. And that way you can get a good flavor. So you can also shake it a bit during the week. So this is the chili pepper. I tried this one this weekend just to see what the flavor was, and it had a tiny bit of hotness to it, but not much. So I'm curious to see from Jennifer how long this might take to get maybe a full flavor profile. This one is the cinnamon, and this one is the cloves. And so this would be a great project for the kids to do as well, quite frankly, I think, and great Christmas gifts, so you could get started on that. So Jennifer, are you still there?
So yes, I've infused hibiscus into honey, dried hibiscus. They're not really flowers, I'm not sure of the term, but the little bright pink things, you can get them in the grocery store. And it doesn't really work with my honey if you want that pink color, because my honey is very dark. But if you have a lighter colored honey and you want pink honey, which is so fun to use, then just put some of those hibiscus flowers, dried hibiscus flowers, in the honey. And Valerie, it probably took a couple months or more for me to get that flavor out and the color that I wanted. So I don't know about the peppers and things, but I think it's probably going to take more than a week or so. But just be patient; it will happen, and it will be delicious.
Oh,
another thing I like to do with honey is to make simple syrups. So I make a lot of those using sugar or honey, and a simple syrup by its very nature is a ratio of 1 to 1 sugar to water. And what I'll do is I'll just put those both on the stove, maybe a half a cup or a cup, whatever I want to make, of the water and the honey on the stove. I'll bring it to a boil, and then I'll cut the heat, and I'll put mint in there, or lemon balm, or lavender. One of my favorites is sage leaves, and a honey sage simple syrup. And you just let that steep until it's cool, strain it, and then that, of course, you do have to refrigerate, and it'll keep a couple of weeks in the refrigerator. Mine sometimes keep a lot longer. I always label my jars with the date that I made them, so that I can be sure that you know, I'm not keeping something way beyond its date. And then I'll use those to put in tea, or I'll add carbonated water with them, like a LaCroix, or if you have a soda siphon, and they're just so refreshing. They're great in cocktails. So that's really one way I use is honey, is in simple syrups and herbs. And they're really, it's just great to have them on hand in the refrigerator.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I knew she'd add some insight into how to be able to use these products in a variety of different ways. So this has been a lot of fun, and I really am so appreciative to Jennifer for putting together such a great presentation and for spending time with us today for us to learn more about bees and appreciate bees. And thanks for all the work that you've done with keeping our environment going with your apiaries, and to Rick as well. So I wanted to just to summarize and show you the products that we have today. So you've just seen the honey. Pull that back just a little bit so you can take a look at that. And then this was the cucumber and dill salad, and I just added it to the jar for one variation. And here's the straight up salad. And then our French apple upside down breakfast casserole.
Thank you so much, Miss Valerie and Jennifer, for joining us today and taking a part of our,
I enjoyed being with you.
Yes, our innovative forum that we have going on. And thank you all to the participants for joining in today and having an opportunity to interact with Miss Jennifer and Valerie. And we will be continuing our CSU Well-being cooking demos. We do them monthly, so please tell a friend and join us. And we do have some questions in the chat, so I will let Miss Valerie answer those a little bit later, and I'll send those back out to all the attendees because I know people have to get to other sessions. So we thank you all so much, and y'all have a wonderful day.
All right. Stay safe, everyone. Don't forget to wash your hands.
The Georgia Pollinator Count is August 21st and 22nd. If you'd like to support local pollinators, it's a citizen science project. You can do it from your backyard, your home, anywhere. So Georgia Pollinator Census coming up next week.
Yay.
We have a couple people that want to know like where to get information about the bees and things like that. So I will get these questions out to you and Jennifer and get the answers, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you. We will respond.
Yeah, I'll be glad to answer those, sure.